Well, it is a frigid morning in Rahway, New Jersey, but back in March of 1887, on a morning much like this one, the quiet streets of Rahway became the grim stage for a mystery that has remained unsolved for more than a century. The scene was as chilling as the weather. A young woman, her life brutally cut short, found lying near Bloodgate's Pond by four brothers who were on their way to work. What followed was a whirlwind of suspicion, intrigue, and unanswered questions that would haunt this town for generations to come. I'm showing some video this morning. Earlier, I went over to the location where her body was found, but now I'm standing in the graveyard where she was buried. And we're going to go to the actual grave of this woman a little later with a man who wrote the book about her murder, a guy named Alex Shipley, who is renowned here in Rahway, New Jersey as a historian. But this woman was young, likely no older than 22 years old, and she was dressed with care. She wore a green cashmere dress that was adorned with feathers, a fur cape to ward off the cold, and was wearing kid gloves. Her face, framed by brown hair and blue eyes, would have been very lovely in life, I believe. But death had been merciless to the young woman. Her throat was slashed twice from ear to ear, her hands covered in defensive wounds, all which bore silent testimony to her struggle. She had bruises on the right side of her face, and they told of a brutal beating that she endured. Nearby, a blood-stained jackknife, a tortoiseshell handle gleamed dully in the frosted dawn morning. It lay discarded near the body. There were also footprints surrounding the body. They were large, the size suggesting that it was probably a man's footprints, a powerful presence looming over her in her final moments of life. Her murder shocked this little community of Rahway, just across the river from New York City. But it also reached out across the nation, filling newspaper headlines all across the country with gruesome details. Yet the woman's identity remained an enigma, then and now. She was a stranger to Rahway, referred to only as the unknown woman. Others called her the Rahway Girl, and some called her Rahway Jane Doe. Despite the mystery surrounding her, she was described as an image of elegance. Her foreign-made shoes and fashionable attire hinted at a refined background and upbringing. But that wasn't the case, as we learned through the investigation that's going to be shared with us in a little while. The only clues found with her were a basket of eggs and items dredged from the Rahway River. There was no name, no connection, only silence. The authorities, desperate for answers, embalmed her body and dressed her in the clothes that she had been found in. A photograph was taken, kind of a macabre calling card for identification. Copies were circulated nationwide, and thousands of people came to this little community to view her body, now eerily preserved and displayed. It even became a gruesome attraction at the Globe Dime Museum, where the life-size body, the likeness of this woman, was put on display in May of 1887. Her killer was never found, but speculation ran rampant. Footprints were obviously too large to be a woman's, so it suggested that a male perpetrator committed this crime. but no one ever stepped forward. I think it's also important to point out that the brutal nature of the beating would suggest probably that this was done by a man. Now, adding a darker twist, some investigators were whispering that there was a connection to Francis Tumblety. He was a flamboyant figure who lived in New York City and was linked by some people to the Jack the Ripper killings. Tumblety was known for his violent hatred of women. And again, keep in mind, he was living just 20 miles away from here in New York City. The question became then, and I guess still remains today, could the hands that ended the life of London's most infamous victims also have claimed this young woman in Rahway, New Jersey? In May of 1887, Rahway Jane's body was laid to rest here in this historic Rahway Cemetery near the historic Merchants and Dovers Tavern. Now that's where we're going to have Alex Shipley meet us and talk a little bit about this case. But her story doesn't end here. Locals say that her spirit lingers on and roams this cemetery as if she's still seeking justice, or at least trying to get her name known. Now this is the story of Rahway Jane Doe, a murder that chilled the nation and still haunts history today. So the question becomes, who was this woman? Why was she killed? And who wielded that jackknife that silenced her forever? Well, Profiling Evil's Twisted Tales dares to unearth the past and examine the clues that are left behind. But beware, folks, this tale, like so many others, offers no comforting resolution, only the echo of unsolved crime. So in a moment, we're going to meet with Alex Shipley, the curator here at the museum and tavern, and we're going to hear a little more about his in-depth investigation into this homicide and the questions that he's had over the many years that have followed. You're going to find him to be captivating and, frankly, incredibly versed on this unknown murder.
Good afternoon. My name is Al Shipley. I'm the city historian and the director of operations over at the Merchants and Drovers Museum, which is located right next to the Rahway Cemetery. I've been doing history in Rahway since 1973, so it's a little over 50 years. And my research has taken me into many areas. And one of the areas that took a good portion of time was a research work on the murder of the unknown woman. I had come across this story when I was 10 years old. The city of Rahway had a centennial, and in the centennial booklet, someone on the committee had put together a one-page story about this woman who in 1887 was brutally murdered here in our town. And that's enough of a shock to a community. But what was more interesting was that they never discovered who the woman was. And for sure they never found out who killed her, and they never found the motive even. So it was a complete cold case. But at any rate, she seemed to have been of European background. And by the way, after that experience when I was 10, the story always kind of stuck in my head somewhere in the back regions. And I did a book for the bicentennial in 1973 for the city, and I included a bit more about the unknown woman's story. I just researched it from the local papers, and that's about it. So a one-page story became a three-page story, and left it alone from there. In 1997, I did another book this time for the Merchants and Drovers, a fundraiser, and again in 2005. And after the 2005 book came out, sitting with a group of people who were over, looking through the book, someone said, did you ever think about doing anything more on the unknown woman? So you know what, I said, maybe I will, and in the next book that we do, I'll have maybe 10 pages on it. So it was late 2005, and I started my search. 5 years later, I came up with the book, The Case of the Unknown Woman. And it was published in 2010, and since that time I've received emails from as far off as Australia, London, Scotland, all keeping this story very much alive. And basically the story is in March of 1887, a woman was walking along Central Avenue in Rahway and was brutally murdered. She was badly beaten, but more strangely, her neck was cut from ear to ear. The next morning, it was a Saturday morning, 4 brothers who were walking to work, they spot what they think is a coat laying in the ground. And they approach it, and the closer they get, they see it's a woman, and they don't know if she's asleep or what, and they get closer, and then they see the blood. One of the brothers is sent to the police chief. Rahway at the time had 2 policemen. And the police chief was awakened in the morning. It was about 6:30-ish, 7 o'clock, and he rushed up to the scene. And by this time, there's about 100 people milling around the body. So any kind of footprint evidence or anything was gone. One fellow came up to the police chief, and he had a knife. He said he found it out in the field. Whether the knife had anything to do with the case or not, nobody knows. But at least it was a bit of evidence. Another guy comes up, and he found on the edge of the river a little satchel. It was locked. And this might be something to do with the murder, too. She was dressed in clothes that were kind of like some fancy, some not so fancy, almost as if she bought them in a used clothes store somewhere.
Yeah.
And there were a dozen eggs and a wicker basket by her side. 3 of the eggs were broken. The rest of them were still whole. So a little more evidence. Where did these eggs come from becomes the question. And over the next, that was a Saturday morning, the coroner from Elizabeth was called in. So it took him some time to get there. And then the next day, on Sunday, they had a viewing for the public. And over 2,000 people came to see the body. Mainly from Elizabeth, Newark, some from New York, and the surrounding area here. It was in the Sunday New York Times, so people from New York had learned about this early in the morning. But at 2 o'clock, a line of people down Irving Street to view the body. There was a policeman, I guess someone who was just sworn in to do this, standing by the coffin. If anyone came by the coffin and said they think they know who she is, they were pulled aside and brought to an office in the building and questioned. And they'd say, like, what kind of earrings did this servant girl wear when she was working for you? And he said, oh, they're little pearls. She liked little pearls. They would say, okay, it's not her then. One of the things that the police knew that anybody else wouldn't know was her ears were not pierced, so she couldn't have earrings. And that sent me on another bit of an offshoot. I had so many offshoots because when I gave talks on this, someone asked, well, they could have been little clip-ons, come on. And now I'll look up clip-ons. They're not invented until 1902. eggs.
So interesting. So let me ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
As an investigator, there's a couple things that really, just listening to you, jump out to me.
Sure.
First is how difficult for a crime scene analysis to have that
Impossible.
chief show up after there's so many people at the crime
Sure.
scene.
Yeah.
And I loved your assessment that the knife could or could not be associated
Sure.
based on the fact that it was recovered by somebody away from the crime scene,
Right.
but she was clearly killed by a knife wound.
Nice.
So that's really interesting, and it becomes really strong circumstantial evidence. But the other thing was the dress and the manner of dress, because many accounts, including those online, talk about her coming from affluence.
Mhm.
But I love your assessment that if she was working as a servant in a home or something, she may have hand-me-downs, she may have things from secondhand stores
Yeah.
or other things. But the thing that intrigues me the most is the eggs, because would it be normal behavior to collect eggs at night versus collecting them in the morning?
Okay. Good question. A number of theories. We don't know who was carrying the eggs. You see, this woman, and it was quite common for somebody when they visited someone, and we think that this woman got off the train right in the railway station, was brought here and by the assailant who was with her, maybe, or she was walking down this lonely path towards Plainfield, maybe, going west, and a guy who was robbing hen houses, because that was common, he's walking and just happens to see her. And so we don't know. Now, if it was a guy who was out robbing hen houses, which was done back then, and he had his basket with the eggs, and he sees a woman and says, oh, maybe I can have some fun tonight, and starts to beat her up, and then maybe she starts to struggle or scream, because the way she's murdered, that's what throws me off, And I'll tell you this now, and I'll tell you later, but that's what makes the connection with Jack the Ripper. And that's possible. It is possible, and I'll tell you about that later. But, why would somebody, I think if someone's trying to rape a woman or something and she's struggling or screaming, he would just kind of stab her, number of times, in the back, maybe in the stomach, and then run off. No, this guy pins her to the ground and slits her throat. Kind of odd. But the eggs, at any rate, they're there. And evidence is not handled like it is today. I mean, when the police chief, after he got the knife from the person who found it, he says to his sergeant, here, put this in your pocket. And he took it and put it in his pocket. That's how they did that. The eggs, they just gathered them up, and they had her clothes on display in the police office, But at any rate, that Sunday goes past, they don't find out who she is. The New York Times was hot on this story. It was in the New York Times 41 days in a row. And every day they put in a different story. All the New York papers, and there were a bunch of them at the time, they all came to Rahway. The Boston Globe was here. The Philadelphia Inquirer was here. The Washington Post was here. It was a hot story. Young woman murdered. It was the time of the yellow journalism was just starting. And boy, this was a sensational story. So they all came, and they all wanted to scoop the story. So they weren't sharing tips. They weren't, so everybody had to go in a different path, which made the research really fascinating, because instead of just one story, I was getting 14 stories. Everybody went in a different direction. And the police were...
The dead girl identified. Mystery of the Rahway murder being cleared away. Recognized as Mary Maltby, a former inmate of the Newark City home, a young woman's love quarrel. Rahway, 31st. Superintendent Harrison of the Newark City home at Verona yesterday visited Rahway in company with a Newark Press Register reporter and recognized a murdered girl as Mary Maltby, formerly inmate of the home he had lost sight of about 3 weeks ago. The city home is an institution for the reformation of wayward boys and girls and is located on the second slope of the Orange Mountains, about 6 miles from Newark. Inmates who show evidence of reformation are either paroled or situations are found for them. In either case, they are kept under some sort of surveillance. 2 years ago, Mary went to the superintendent and said she would like to get a situation. She had been an exemplary girl in the home, and Mr. Harrison acceded to the request by getting her work at a farmhouse. She had been in the home several years, having been sent there when 11 years old by her father in Newark. In her incarceration, both her parents died, and she had no relations left except an uncle in Newark. An old black woman named Miss Johnson, now living at number 66 Newark Street, also knew her and had charge of some of her personal effects. Mary leaves Elizabeth. She behaved so well on the farm that her uncle sent for her about the middle of last year, and she went to live with him in Newark. Here she fell into vicious ways, and her life appeared to struggle between degradation and a desire to do better. This time she wrote occasionally to Mr. Harrison, who also received letters from persons employing her. On November 28th, Miss Johnson, the black woman, wrote that her influence with Miss Mary was gone and that she was living somewhere in McWhorter Street, Newark. On December 19th, Miss Johnson again wrote that she could not influence the girl for good. On January 10th, Mary wrote from Elizabeth stating she had a place, but was about to leave it. She said, "I come to this place and I find it very nice place, but I have another place in view where I can learn some more the housework. You know that I have a gentleman friend and he wants me to be something else besides a servant. I told him this lady that she might be able to get a girl from the home. It is a place something like Miss Crane's, and it would be a splendid place for a girl. She's treated as one of the family." Same mail, the superintendent received a letter from Miss Susan B. Winans, number 1140 Washington Street, Elizabeth, asking for a truthful and honest girl and saying that she had one from the home, evidently referring to Mary. About 2 weeks ago, Mr. Harrison received a note from the girl saying that she would like to see him, and he answered that he was going to Newark. He would see her at a grocery store where he bought supplies. Mary met him and seemed extremely despondent. She had been in the hospital in Newark. She said she was tired of living. A couple of days afterward, one of the women in the home again saw the girl and said she expressed penitence for her bad conduct. Mr. Harrison never saw Mary again and had no trace of her up to the time of the murder. Mr. Harrison's identification. The published description of the murdered girl were read by the superintendent Harrison several days ago, and he became impressed with the belief that the girl was Mary Maltby. It was not until after a conversation with the reporter that he decided to visit Rahway to see the body of the girl. The superintendent and the reporter first stopped at Elizabeth, where the latter procured a photograph of the murdered girl and showed it to Mr. Harrison. He said instantly that the picture was that of Mary. To make sure, Rahway was then visited, and as soon as Mr. Harrison viewed the face of the dead girl, he drew back, partly faint. Hurrying with the reporter into the open air, he said emphatically, "Yes, it is Mary Maltby." Mr. Harrison was so shocked that he did not feel inclined to see anyone and returned to Newark. Miss Johnson, the black friend of the girl, was visited at her home in Newark Street. She said she knew Mary well and affirmed that last Saturday Mary called at her house and asked for some papers and letters contained in the truck, which Miss Johnson refused to give up. This was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. To closely question, Miss Johnson could not positively say that it was not on Friday that the girl called at the house, as she was busy on that day. Miss Winars, Mary's former employee, was seen at her house, number 1140 Washington Street, Elizabeth, by Mr. Harrison and the reporter. She remembered Mary, and when shown the girl's photograph, recognized it as Mary's. Said that while Mary was in her employ, she had a lover, a tall, thin man, who called at the house one day and took Mary to Newark. He told her that the man belonged in Newark or Brooklyn and boarded in Newark. When Mary left her service, she received a letter from her stating that she had a falling out with her lover and that they had separated. Miss Winans had not heard from the girl since. Nothing was known in Rahway of the identification, and the daily crop of clues and rumors as to the girl's identity was duly harvested. Many persons called the morgue to see the body, some of them in the hoy of identifying the dead girl as a missing friend or relative. At 8 o'clock last evening, a young man named John T. Neary asked to be admitted to the morgue. Some people who saw him thought that he resembled the woman who he thought was his sister Kate. 22 years old, and left her home in New York Thursday with $125 in her possession to visit friends in Elizabeth. She had not been seen since. He said that the dead girl strongly resembled his sister, but he could not positively identify her. A theory of robbery. It is generally believed in Rahway that the murder was committed for robbery. The proof of this is the fact that no money was found in the girl's possession. Furthermore, it was discovered yesterday that the pocket of her dress was stained with blood on the inside. It is thought that these stains were made by the murderer's bloody hand as he reached for plunder. The fact that in the bag found in the brook was no underclothing, that did contain a pair of old shoes and a pair of dirty suspenders, leads to the belief that the bag was packed by somebody to give the impression that it had been carried by the murdered girl. A boy who lives with his parents not far from the scene of the murder is reported as saying that on the evening of the murder, he saw a strange woman in the house of a neighbor. The girl showed considerable money. The same evening, the boy and his father saw a young man of the town who bears a somewhat unsavory reputation lounging about the house where the strange girl was staying. He was armed with a club, but he said he intended to use the club only to punish some boys who had thrown stones at his house. It is said that on the morning after the murder, the boys in the family which the strange woman was visiting did not go to see the corpse. Mother having told them that they know the dead girl and that would scare them into fits. Anthony Knoll, the tramp who was found in Jersey City and against whom there was a remote suspicion that he was the murderer, was relieved of his suspicion yesterday. Chief of Police Tooker of Rahway came to Jersey City in the afternoon and brought with him the bone button found near the woman's body. It did not correspond with the buttons on Knoll's coat, which are cloth covered. Chief Murphy is convinced that there is no evidence whatsoever to connect Knoll with the crime. The coroner's inquest was yesterday, adjourned until next Friday. Mr. Stacy took additional photographs of the murdered girl yesterday with the corpse arranged as nearly as possible as when the girl was alive. Common Council held a special meeting last night. Mayor Daley stated that the object for calling the same was that it seemed to be the wish of many citizens that the city should join with the state in offering a reward for the arrest of a murderer. A resolution was offered authorizing Mayor Daley to issue a proclamation offering a reward of $200 for the arrest and conviction of the murderer. This makes a total of $1,000 for the arrest of the murderer and $200 for identification. It was rumored at police headquarters in New York yesterday that the police sergeant had a clue to the murderer. Detective Sergeant Detective Crystal of the 6th Precinct went to Rahway early, and it was said that they were not expected to return until a late hour. The object of the journey was believed to be the subject of a long consultation which Inspector Burns had with Sir Superintendent Murray in the afternoon.
And the police were confounded by this, because you can't let any story go, and you had to follow all of them somehow. Well, the Times says we've got to get her picture to all the police stations around the East Coast. So, and they actually got to San Francisco with these pictures. Well, the next Sunday they're going to do it again. And on Tuesday, before that Sunday, they take the woman out of the coffin, they put her in a chair, they prop her up, get her eyes pinned up, and they take her pictures frontal and side. And then they post them all over at the police stations. If anybody knows this woman, well, the next Sunday they have her on view again. And this time, 5,000 people come to town. And now they're from Boston, they're from Philadelphia, they're from Washington. And people came because, I haven't seen my sister in 6 years, which wasn't uncommon then. And I know she was living around New York. It could be her. So they come. And again, throughout all the people who pass by, some had stories, some think they know who it is. Everyone's questioned. Nobody comes up with the right description. All right, we're going to do it another Sunday. So the next Sunday they do it, and now we have another 5,000. This time, St. Louis is here, Chicago's here, Atlanta, Georgia's here, and again the same thing. Well, the Times said, you can't bury this lady, because once she's buried, nobody's ever going to be able to figure out who she is. So they said, all right, what we'll do is we'll keep her in the morgue, and if somebody comes to the police station here in Rahway and they say, I think I know who it is, they bring her to the morgue and let them see it. But even that doesn't. But one woman came in, and she said, this is my sister. And they bring her in, and he said, oh yeah. And the woman looked a little bit like the unknown woman, but she had one fact that didn't match the autopsy. Because when they did the autopsy, they found that the unknown woman was never had a child. She was never pregnant. Which took me to the coroner in Elizabeth. And I said to the coroner, I said, now let me ask you something. If you did an autopsy on somebody 25 years old, around 25, and could you tell if she ever had a child or not? And he said, yes, you should be able to. And then I says, well, how about if she had the child when she was 16? Yeah, they still should be able to tell. Oh. What about in 1887? Could they have told then? And he said they should have known. Yes, they should have known. Wow. I says, all right. Well, the woman who came in with the sister story, her sister at age 16 had had a child. So the authorities said, it can't be this woman. Can't be this woman. Nope. So that's not the woman. And finally, the ministers in the town were getting pretty angry about this. You can't do this. You got to bury this poor girl. 5 weeks later, it was
Even then, how did they keep the body preserved?
a lot of ice. And the undertaker, who was maybe the only sympathetic person involved with this story, he said, you know what? He said, you got another problem. He says, this woman that we have today doesn't look anything like the woman that I started with 4 weeks ago. So at any rate, she's buried. They bring her here. They put her on the other side of the path, away from all of the other good Christians.
And why? Why put her away from the good Christians?
Well, they didn't know if she was a virtuous woman. You see, she could have been a prostitute. You know? And you can see all the stones around her are new. So she's right here. Mrs. Space, the woman who swore it was her sister, he contacted the city about a year after the woman was buried. And he said, you know, the woman should have some kind of a mark, because they buried her and probably put maybe a cross on the grave, or maybe nothing, I don't know. But she said she should have a marker. And the mayor says, all right, yes, I'll pay for you, you know. And I think what happened was the committee got together and said, you got to be crazy. You can't let that woman put a stone up, because she's going to put her sister's name on it or something. So what are we going to do? Well, let's make a stone and then just put it there. And I think that's what happened, because this is the coldest, hardest stone you'll ever want to see. If this was my sister or your sister, I don't think we would put down an unknown woman found dead.
Has there ever been any discussion about giving her a new stone that's...
Well, I would somehow try to preserve it. I wouldn't put a new stone, but I talked to some monument people, and again, it's a matter of cost. I mean, you know, somebody's got to want to put the cost for it. But the stone is made out of cheap marble, like all the Civil War and later stones were made, and acid rain just kills them. And the story after it ended, I mean, after she was buried, the story didn't end. I mean, for months later, we get a call from or Western Union telegram from Illinois that they found the murderer. He confessed. So they sent the detective from Elizabeth out to Illinois to get the story and bring this guy back. And they realized that he's just a crank, and he wanted free passage back to New York. That's what he was looking for, because none of the things that he said really matched up with anything. So you had cranks, too, you know, who, for whatever reason, wanted to get the credit for the murder, but they never found anybody. The Jack the Ripper connection came up when, on 2 occasions during the 5 years I was working on the book, people came to some of the museum events and said, you know, I think that it was Jack the Ripper. And the first time I kind of laughed to myself, and the second time I laughed a little less to myself, and I said, well, you know what, I'm going to check out Jack the Ripper's story. I couldn't tell you when he was around or anything at that point. And I look, his murder started in 1888. And nobody really knows who Jack the Ripper was. In fact, I think it could be 4 or 5 different people. Could be multiple people who are doing these murders. One of them happened to be an American. And I traced this American, and it turns out he was from the Minnesota, Michigan area, and he was a mock. He worked in the druggist store, and then claimed he was a doctor. And I even looked into doctor history, and doctors in the 1800s, you know, if you went to school past the 9th grade, you could consider yourself a doctor, you know? So he hangs a shingle out, he's a doctor, and he kills somebody by mistake. Flees to Canada, and he's up in there for a while, comes back in the States, lives in New York, in the spring of 1887. So it puts him in the right place, and then in April of 1887, for some reason, he gets on a steamer and he goes to London. But the only thing that makes me, you know, associate it to any degree is the fact that she was, you know, her throat was slit.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't imagine a guy, you know, out of the blue doing that. Or even if somebody, another story is, she was met by somebody outside of the immigration area, which at that time was Castle Guards. And I learned a lot about Castle Garden too. It was, everybody thinks, oh, the immigrants came in and they were treated, this and this, and take care of yourself. And do you have somebody to pick you up? And, do you know where you're going? No, it was more like, stick your tongue out, let me check your hair for lice. And poor girls, especially, they go outside and all of a sudden they're looking up at New York and, and they can't speak English. And there's bums out there. And they, kind of coax the girls, I have eat, food, drink, and they take them down the street. They turn into the first alley, hit them over the head, rob them, and, these poor girls are left really to become prostitutes for the most part. Well, in that bag that they found, they opened it up with the knife that the guy gave them at the burial site. They opened the thing up, and what the police think is that the guy who killed her took her thing, so maybe it was a robbery attempt, and got to the next bridge, couldn't open it, was still scared of what had happened, and just threw it over the bridge. Maybe that's what happened. Another one is she was sent to the United States, like so many others, to live with, to meet up with another relative. So this girl gets off the boat, gets picked up by somebody, and maybe she had a note. And, the note said an address in Plainfield or something. So they take the ferry over to, at that time, Jersey City. They get on the train. They come into Rahway, and this is the stop where they're going to get off. They get off, and they start walking towards Plainfield. And in Rahway, you've got kind of a neighborhood, right? And then all of a sudden, when you cross St. George Avenue on the west side, it's woods or fields. I guess the guy said, boy, now's my chance. And he kills her. Yeah. But bizarre things happen. The eggs, getting back to the eggs, when the New York poultry show was first held in Madison Square Garden, they had a bird that was hatched from one of those eggs on display. And they advertised it in all the advertisements for the bird shows. They said,
How did they do that?
Well, I asked the guy in the poultry business, could you, if you found 9 eggs on the ground, could a hen actually, be hatched? Yes, if they're treated right. Well, the sergeant, he takes custody of the eggs, and he had his own little, hen house, like many people did, and he treated it the way it's supposed to be. And one of the eggs hatched, and it was this. Yeah. So they wanted to do that. That was in their head from the start, because they said if we can find what kind of bird it is, maybe we can find out what coop they came from, whose farm they came from. That's what they wanted to try to do. And the first thing they did in the first couple of days is they hunted down every hen supplier or egg supplier that they could to see did a woman come by and buy a dozen eggs, and what did she look like? They went through all that. The autopsy had a bunch of things. One was she was not, how did they say it? Not violated. They used the term that was very nice. The police chief, after he left, he lived in Rahway. He took the clothes, and his wife put them out to air once a year on the March day that she was killed, and people from around the area would come and see them. Yeah. And I have a letter, believe it or not, a woman, 1993, she wrote it. She said her mother still remembers, going past the casket and seeing the clothes, some years later. It's an ongoing story. People are intrigued by it, and as you can see, it still resonates. People love the story and what's happened to a lot of people. Why don't they dig her up and take DNA? I don't know what they find, but I wouldn't recommend doing it even. I think the story itself makes once they find out who it is, there's no more story, And I don't even know if I was trying to figure this story out, because I knew there was no solution to it before I started writing it. And I didn't think I was going to find out who it was, and that's what makes the story interesting. I think if I put at the end, well, with all my research, I think it's so and so, and she was killed by so and so. That didn't happen, and I'm glad it didn't happen. That's right. Well, everybody, when I take groups into the cemetery, I said every one of these people have stories. And that's what makes it so fascinating to come through here. And we're always discovering a new person, just by walking through and, catching one thing, a kid that was killed when he was 9 years old, drowning. And then what in the world happened? And then you look up that story, and now you have and you get to know the whole family. And the book, The Case of the Unknown Woman, was published in 2010. If you're interested in a copy, they're sold on Amazon. So you can just look up The Case of the Unknown Woman and get the details on how to purchase them. If you have especially now, this season, a friend or relative who's into this kind of mystery story, it makes a good late-minute Christmas present. So it's available out there. On the front is a reward poster that was posted on the fronts of all the police stations. One of them came up for sale on eBay, so I never got it. I will tell you this, so I saw another one of these back in the 70s, and it was owned by a private family in Rahway who has since moved on and passed on.
Sell some of these online at the same time. Would you sign any and mail them to people personally?
Sure, absolutely.
And we would maybe sell them for double the price, so you could put a little money toward the museum?
Sure, absolutely.
Well, also, I don't know, I'm feeling a little compelled right now, but we need to get this woman a better stone. We can't get rid of this particular headstone that's here. It's got to stay because it's part of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But I could envision a nice plaque accompanying it that tells who she is, at least a little more information that isn't worn out over time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to also look for some donations on that. And donations up to $500, I'll match and pay the other $500. We'll get you the $1,000 you need to do that really much. Nice.
The whole community would really appreciate that, because so many people do love the story.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic story. Well, thanks again, Alex.
Okay.
What an honor.
No problem. Thank you.
Well, hey, folks, I'm back in the office, and I'm reaching out with a special request to help honor this forgotten victim of tragedy, the unknown Jane Doe of Rahway, New Jersey, who was murdered in 1887 and part of this Twisted Tales series. Her story has faded into history, but her humanity deserves to be remembered. Sadly, her headstone, as shown in this video, has decayed over the last 150 years and is now almost unrecognizable. To preserve her memory and to give her dignity, the dignity she deserves, we're raising money to help replace her headstone with a lasting memorial, a bronze memorial that will be attached and preserve the existing headstone. So here's where you come in. I'm asking for your help to raise $500. And if we hit that goal, I'll personally match it with another $500 from Profiling Evil. And together we can make this happen. Now, Alex says that the cost is going to be $1,000, so I need your help. But once this headstone is installed, I'll publish a video to celebrate this milestone, and together we'll honor this woman we never knew, but a woman who represents countless lives lost to the tragedy of evil. So please, click the link below or scan the QR code on the screen to make a donation. Every contribution, no matter how small or large, makes a difference. Let's ensure that the Jane Doe of Rahway, New Jersey is never forgotten. Thank you for your support of Profiling Evil and for standing up to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Now, I hope you'll take time to enter your comments down below on this particular video on Rahway Jane Doe and all of our videos in this new series, Twisted Tales. It's a place where we learn a little bit about crimes that have occurred, but without the emotion of the crime being ongoing at the moment, we can kind of explore the behaviors and learn together. So thanks so much for tuning in to Profiling Evil. I hope that you'll check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like audio podcasts, folks, make sure you're checking out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're enjoying our content, you can get even more on our website at profilingevil.com, where you can sign up for the BOLO, our digital newsletter. You can check out our story maps, and you can check out our new missing persons and unsolved homicides crowdsourced map, a place where you can enter cases from your own community. Hey, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.